Alright folks, I want to take a few moments and run through some Lightroom images that I've taken recently while traveling, and just show you a couple quick tips and techniques for giving your images a little bit more oomph, a little bit more punch, a little bit more pop without overdoing it. We're not going to work on all of these images, and some you may have seen if you've been following along. But first, we're not going to work on this image really at all, but these two images right here, let's do our little side by side, is an excellent example of circular polarizer on to maximum effect on the right, completely reducing all of the glare, and on the left, this is like this wet algae kind of stuff that washes up on the beach, and on the left the circular polarizer is on, but it's rotated to the minimum effect, and you can see that there is just a complete washout or glare. One of the reasons I'm such a fan of circular polarizers is this is an effect many times that just cannot be recreated in post-processing. Let's try it for fun real quick, because it is so much fun, to see if we can go into our basic, get our highlights and bring them down, and see can we bring our exposure down. And certainly we can start to watch down here in the bottom left corner. We can start to match the level of brightness, but we cannot reduce this shine. There's just no way to take that off, and it's actually even really starting to look crummy with this purple fringing in here that's really happening. And the circular polarizer, none of that. All of the settings were identical. ISO 3200, sorry, 320, 70 millimeters f4, 1/640th of a second. Over here, the exact same settings. Simply rotating a circular polarizer removes that reflection out of there, which is so nice. Now I can hit. I am currently filtering for 1 star and yellow as a subset of pictures that I wanted to share with you all tonight, so I can zero those out and get rid of them. I use this as a recent Instagram, and also as an example of what the 2x extender can get you. This was on a 70-200 lens that I applied the 2x extender. I have a video about that. So it gives me 400 millimeters. Christina is just crying out silently in the background because this horizon is so crooked. My excuse was I was in a raft and moving down, but real quick I just grabbed the crop tool, and I'm going to find where that seems to be straightened, somewhere right around there. It's awful bright. I'm going to bring my exposure down a little bit, but increase our contrast. And I'll tell you what I actually did in the Instagram version. Well, first off, went to 1:1 right there in that tool, and I cropped it. I did not dead center the guy because he's headed towards the right, so I gave him a little bit of room to the right. And I thought that looked a little bit better. What I actually did, I'm not going to go into this tonight, but I took my masking tool and I really kind of, let's see, I think it was exposure. I really painted in the background, and because it's bright back there. And you can have auto mask on. What that does is it'll try to be smart enough to look for edges that it should not paint itself onto. Now, to help yourself see what you're painting, you can do the little show selected mask, and look how it's not hitting the deer as much. It's being fairly smart about that. And you have a lot of options over here about the size, the feathering amount. You can see in the circle we have the outer. That's kind of how it fades gradually as a gradient. And the flow, the strength as we paint this on here. So just think about a spray paint can, and the higher the flow, the more paint you're spraying out. And then you can, of course, zoom in at any time, hit the Z key, and you are in close. And then I could erase and clean this up a little bit. And that's exactly what I did. But let's just say done for now and zoom back out. And that's a little bit better, but we're back to this is now affecting the whole image, not just the masked area. Let's bring our highlights down a little bit. Let's bring our clarity up a little, which adds a little punch to it, and a little teeny bit of vibrance and saturation. And it's much better. Check my Instagram to see the one that I really spent some time on, and it came out quite nice. Now this is really what I wanted to show here tonight, a couple of tips on this. Now recently working with some folks through the critiquing videos that we do, somebody had really tried to get the sky exposure right The rest of the image I think ended up fairly noisy because of that. I'm not sure exactly their steps to do that. But and I also recently got questions about using graduated neutral density filters. That simply is a filter that usually is square. They make them circular too though, but it is darker on one side and lighter on another, and gradually over the course of from the top to the bottom, let's say, of the filter, goes from darker to light. That's really useful in circumstances like this where you have a very bright sky and the landscape is much darker. Now, there's not a huge difference here. Sunrises and sunsets is another place where you can really see a big difference. And you throw one of these filters on, and it allows you to capture the sky without blowing it out while still capturing the land without it being completely in shadow. But they're kind of a pain. You got to remember to bring them. The good ones are costly. And if you think about one that is evenly graduated from top to bottom, it can be a little bit difficult to use in a circumstance like this where the land is reaching up on the left and the right. I'm going to show you something that still has that same problem of left and the right, but instead of using the paintbrush tool to apply something, I'm going to go here to this guy. This is our graduated filter, and I'm going to click here at the top and I'm going to drag down. And it is doing the exact same thing as adding some glass would be. And again, if you're shooting RAW, these tools are going to have the maximum effect. If you're shooting JPEG, there isn't as much information in the file for it to work with, so it's not going to be able to. So I can lower, you can see I've already lowered the exposure a little bit. I can also change the color balance to a little bit bluer to bring out the blues in the sky, kind of negate some of that whiter clouds or grayer clouds. I can add a little bit of contrast, and so you can bring it to the right, and we're starting to get a good bit more dramatic. And I'm going to say done real quick just to get rid of these lines. Notice that this transition is very smooth. There's nothing bad. There's no, oh, that's the edit line where this person worked. No, it works out very nicely. Yes, I just hit the gradient button again. I'm going to drag up from the bottom somewhere right around here, and I'm going to go to the right and brighten this up a little bit. Again, add a little bit of contrast down here and a little bit of clarity. Not too much. Just a small amount. You can overdo it quick, and maybe a little saturation to bring out the color in those trees. I'm going to hit done. Another thing that I notice is this little junk over here, a little tree fall is in the way. So I'm going to crop. I'm not planning on Instagramming this anytime soon, so I'm going to keep it at the same aspect ratio as before. I like a little bit of the water, but noticing that with the water in there, the horizon is a little crooked. So I'm watching, I think right around there is straighter. That looks good. Now, this looks like I could be in the middle of Alaska or someplace really remote, except we have these power lines running right here. I've put this out there for discussion before. How much editing is too much? It's really up to you, but I don't feel like I need to see these power lines in my picture. So I'm going to grab my little spot removal tool, which is no longer correctly named. In Lightroom 4 it could just remove spots. In Lightroom 5 it's able to remove more of an area, so area removal tool. I have an option of cloning or healing. Healing is a little bit smarter than cloning. It will try to match the area, and now I can drag through this line. And I'll tell you honestly, it doesn't always work perfectly the first time. But let's give it a second there and click done. That worked pretty good. That power line is gone. We got a second one. So let's go back to this tool, and I'm going to come through here again. And sometimes what I see, and let's see if it does it right now, it's not smart enough, and it will actually grab from above. If we click done, nope, it grabbed below. It's pretty smart. If we zoom in, how are we doing here? We can see that there's a little bit of funny business in those areas, and there we go. We can see the line, editing line here and here. Not perfect. So we can come back in here. We can click this guy. We can really feather it. We can lower the opacity if we need to. We can also shrink the size, so it really is just that area that we were working with. Actually, I don't know if you can do that after the fact, but I did that in about 30 seconds. Take twice that amount, a minute, to do it a little bit more carefully, and your power lines will be gone. Over here is another, this is, both of these scenes are just gorgeous views, I think, this is in the Cascades, Pacific Northwest. Just really lucky to have these kind of blue sky days when we were there. Another place to use the gradient tool and exposure. And you know, I just dragged it down before, but you can also drag at an angle if that works better for you. Or, I'm going to do Command Z there. There is, next to the graduated filter, there is the radial filter. And that will do a circular, and you can do a little bit better of not, especially in this kind of mountainous landscape where the mountains are up and down on the left and right, doing that. And so you can then bring that up or down, and down just a little bit, and again just bring the blue down a little bit, and a little bit of sharpness, a little bit of clarity, and well, just watch for a second. When you add a lot of clarity, you can really use it to soften the background as well, and it's great for people's skin if you lower the clarity a little bit and the sharpness. But if I increase it just until the clouds start to pop, but you don't want those really hard edges. You can also come down here and invert, but I'm going to in a second just say okay, close that, and then I'm going to get this tool. Now, a quick tip, you don't have to drag from the bottom. I know that I want all of this area to be affected to the maximum by the gradient filter. So I'm going to start right here and drag up and up to about the top of those mountains. And now it is going to increase its exposure just a little bit. And I'm actually going to make this just a little bit more yellow. It's just a little bit too blue. And bring the tint down. So here, let's just slide it dramatically so you can see. See, that's overdoing it. I'm going to go back to the right a little bit. It's somewhere right around there, and I like a little bit more contrast and that little bit more of clarity. And I think that looks quite nice. You could also do a radial gradient right from where the sun is so that you really dampen that brightness as it moves away from the sun. And we got a little sun flare right here. I don't think that the lens had, there's another one right there, had a lens hood on. My lens hood broke a little while ago, and I haven't got a new one yet. So I think that's why we're seeing those. You could clone them out if we wanted to. I'm going to just press the right bracket key to make this a little bit bigger. And it just grabs from over there, and it didn't do such a good job. So let's just start to drag it down a little bit. And there we go, matched it up. And I want the opacity to be 100 in this case, and feathering, let's unfeather just a little bit. There we go. That one's gone. This other one, if you took a little bit more time, you could do. This is another one where I think we want the gradient to, so you're getting the idea here, dragging up. And let's increase the exposure here a little bit to really bring out those greens. You know what, actually, let's reset that and close that. Let's bring up our exposure over the whole, because there's enough of the landscape that we don't need to use a gradient for the bottom. And let's increase our contrast. Gets rid of some of that haze. Let's bring our highlights down a little bit, which will bring a little bit more detail out on the top of the mountains, those very bright areas. The shadows we can bring up a little bit as well. Again, working with a raw file, all of this information is kind of hiding in there. And I'm going to bring the blacks down a little bit, which gives you just a little bit more contrast. You can see it gets kind of soft, but we just bring them down just a little bit of punch, a little bit of clarity. See, just that was at 7, 11. Too much, over sharpened there. If you like that look, that's fine. I really like fairly subtle, but what always happens is after you go really high, something somewhat high still looks good. But let's settle on 20 and bring the vibrance and the saturation over just a little bit. I've talked in more detail in other Lightroom videos. I've got a whole playlist about those. Go watch if you would like. That looks good. Now let's get our gradient tool, and you can always adjust before you apply. And that trick of not starting at the top, but starting where you know you want the fading to start, right around here. And we could also, so let's say we didn't like that because we really hit the side of this mountain and this mountain well. So we could go with our radial gradient and come down like so. Let's see, we want to invert that, right? Yep. That looks a little overdone. Or if we don't like how light it is up here and up here, let's reset that. Then you could paint. So I have exposure. I've got the brush, and I could just start painting, and we can undo that in this area. And you want to be careful because you can pretty easily leave brush marks behind if you're not careful. So you want to watch out for your feathering and your flow. And if you're really seeing those brush marks, you may want to increase your feathering and decrease your flow. But I think that looks fairly nice. Maybe a little bit too much. You got to watch out for those halos around the edges. And you feel like it's too much in any one place, that gives me a good idea of what's been hit and what hasn't. You can come over to the erase and, wow, see what happens? So let's undo that, Control or Command Z, and let's get a low flow, a high feather, and let's see if I can get rid of that corner that's just a little too unnatural looking. I'm just clicking, and each time I'm clicking it's applying. I think that's better. Enough that someone wouldn't notice. I could actually crop in just a little bit. I'm going to leave it original because we got that little bit of a green branch there that's not adding anything right there. And by cropping, we take that out. Good. Next two images I shot at 70 millimeters. And I just want to show you these two. We could actually even put them up side by side. But you can, if you have Photoshop, edit in, merge to Panorama and Photoshop. That's all I had to do. One more click in Photoshop, and then this is the resulting image that I got out of that. A little bit of a wider image. Beautiful. You cannot see where these two images were stitched together. And again, Photoshop did all of that work for me, and there's a lot more detail in this image because you're taking two of them. This image right here I thought was cool because the way the light was catching in the falls really had a nice rainbow. You can see that I've already adjusted this though, really brought up the saturation. And you know what else I did? I painted right through the rainbow to increase the saturation and make that pop more without oversaturating the surrounding area. So again, using that. Now, this was another mention in the critiquing video the other night about distortion. So this was shot 35 millimeters on a full frame camera, and you can see that it feels like this building is leaning back away from you. Now, I'll be honest, and I still don't always see distortion right off the bat. It takes me a minute, and I go, it's something a little funny. And it was in one of the church pictures from the other night where it was shot with a 10 millimeter lens on a crop sensor, so that's 16, works out to be about 16. That's very, very wide, and it feels like the church is leaning back and away from you pretty significantly. I want to show you that Lightroom can fix this. Come down here to Lens Corrections. First thing you can do is enable profile correction, and it knows, it's usually smart enough to know what lens was attached to the camera and automatically pulls that information up. Notice that it brightened the corners a little bit, and it didn't feel like there was much distortion here because of the focal length it was shot at. But the angle that it was shot at did cause some distortion. So I can say, on the basic part of lens correction, I can say full. And look at that. Look at it just, let's turn it back off for a second. Leaning away. Straight up and down. And now I do plan to make this an Instagram sometime soon, so I'm going to 1-to-1 it, and it fits so nicely in that square. Maybe you can see that there's still a little bit of distortion in that the corner of the building is closer to the edge here than it is up here. Same on the other side, so it can't fix it 100%, but it certainly is better. And then the other basic thing, just add a little bit of contrast to this, and just a little bit of clarity, not too much, and I think that looks like a better image. And we could take these power lines out if we wanted to, but we don't have to. These four images here, I just want to show you again with a 2x extender, so we're a little off topic, but this is 70 millimeters. This is 200 millimeters with 200 millimeters. This is 200 millimeters with the extender on, and this is 400 millimeters. So you can see that there is quite a difference between 70 and 400, and you might be thinking, well, absolutely, there is quite a bit of difference. Here's another example. Here is 57 millimeters. Take note of this kind of glacier that's about to peel off, or not about to, but always hanging right up here, Mount Shushkin. And on the right, or in the next image, 400 millimeters, here it is. Now let me show you another way to, we are zoomed in, and this is not cropped at all. This is the original image. You can see that there is this kind of cool, you've seen those images of glaciers before where they really have that color in them. This is another place where you can paint, instead of exposure, let's paint a little bit of saturation on here. Maybe not 100. But we painted in this area, and we can keep this image looking fairly natural, but bring out the color that is in the glacier without making the snow a funny color or the rocks in the area around it. So we can paint just a little bit. Oops. And I keep forgetting that we're zoomed in. That's it. That's all I want to do. We could also add just a little contrast to the overall image, I think. Bring the highlights down. Let's leave the highlights. And bring the blacks down a little bit. Too much. But it's cool. Last image. Nice waterfall, long exposure, 8 seconds at f16. I did use a circular polarizer, but one of the nice things was it was a little bit cloudier at this point, and it was deep in the forest. So I'm just going to crop this in a little bit and show you one other technique. So we could switch the tint to green to really bring out the greens here, but look, everything turns green, and now it looks like the Grinch attacked this. So let's leave that somewhere right around there, because we really want this water to stay this clean white. Come down to color, and we have in here the green, and for just the green we can control its hue, so we can shift the green colors so into a different angle. Wow, but look at our water staying nice and clear. We don't want to overdo it, or I don't want to overdo it, but you know, the camera doesn't quite pick up the saturation exactly as it was, or the color, so I'm going to just increase the hue to the little bit more of the vibrant green, and our luminance you can actually darken. This is darken or lighten that color in that area, so I think it was fine where it is, maybe +2. That's it. Wow, that was 22 packed minutes of some Lightroom tips, tricks, and techniques. Let's review real quick. We talked about using the mask tool in the painterly fashion with the brush. We talked about using it as a radial or a gradient filter. And we talked about using the clone stamp tool. And with all of those things, adjusting our contrast and saturation. Now, a lot of things, actually I should say not a lot, but just a couple, I have apply when they come in. Let's close this real quick. I have an import preset, and really all it does is under clarity, adds just a little bit of clarity, and it automatically adds the lens correction. Well, it should. And so those things are automatically set as I import, and you could do a good bit more if you know you always end up wanting to add a little bit of saturation, or you know, increase your contrast just a little bit. You can bring these images in and have them pop just a bit more. Thanks so much for watching, and if you have any other topics that you would like to see covered in Lightroom in a future video, just leave a comment down below. Thanks.